Damon Langley didn't expect to throw a punch before lunch, but when he saw a man grab the woman in the blue blazer outside the coffee shop, instinct kicked in. "Hey," Damon shouted, his voice cutting through the afternoon buzz on the sidewalk. The man clutching the woman's wrist turned, startled. The woman's eyes widened as Damon stepped between them, pushing the man back with one hand and shielding her with his body. "Let go of her," Damon barked. The guy, mid-30s, in a cheap suit and with a face that screamed entitlement, scoffed. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Damon growled. The man dropped her wrist and backed away when Damon squared up, fists clenched. "She owes me a favor," he muttered before walking off, disappearing into the crowd. Damon turned around, heart pounding, to face the woman. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, brushing her dark hair off her face. "Yeah, he was an old business contact. He thought he could push me around." Damon noticed the slight tremble in her fingers. "You sure you're okay?" "I am now," she said, her voice steadier. "Thank you." He nodded, but before he could say more, a small voice called from the cafe door behind him. "Daddy," Damon turned. His 6-year-old daughter, Ruby, bounded toward him with a chocolate chip cookie in one hand and her backpack in the other. She stopped short when she saw the woman, her curious eyes flicking between them. "Everything good?" Ruby asked, frowning. Damon smiled and ruffled her curls. "Yeah, baby, just helping someone." The woman crouched to Ruby's level. "Hi there," she said warmly. "What's your name?" "Ruby," she said proudly. "What's yours?" The woman stood again, offering her hand to Damon. "Dahlia Lawson." He shook it, her grip firm. "Damon Langley. Nice to meet you, Damon, and thank you again." He nodded. "Anytime." Dahlia glanced at her watch. "I've got to get back to a meeting," but she paused, then reached into her bag and handed him a sleek black business card, no title on it, just her name and a number. "In case you ever need anything." He stared at the card after she walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Huh," he said under his breath. Ruby tugged his hand. "Is she famous?" "Probably just rich," Damon muttered, shoving the card in his pocket and steering Ruby toward the ice cream truck. He didn't think he'd see her again. But 2 days later, she walked into the mechanic's garage where Damon worked. He was under the hood of a car, grease on his hands, sweat on his brow. When he looked up and saw her heels clicking across the concrete floor, he blinked. "Dahlia," she smiled. "Hey," he wiped his hands on a rag, confused. She was wearing a navy dress that probably cost more than his rent and a matching handbag. "Everything okay? Do you need your car fixed?" "No," she said. "I wanted to say thank you again. And I was hoping I could buy you a coffee." He glanced toward Ruby, who was seated in the office corner coloring, a small stack of books beside her. "I'm actually on shift till 6. She followed his gaze. "That's your daughter." "Yeah, Ruby. She hangs here after school till my neighbor gets off work." Dahlia's eyes softened. "She's adorable." Damon narrowed his eyes, still not sure what this woman wanted from him. "You don't owe me anything, Dahlia." "I know. But I wanted to say thanks properly." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let me grab my jacket." They sat in a quiet corner of the local diner. Dahlia looked out of place, like she belonged in a rooftop lounge in Manhattan, not across from a guy with calloused hands and a stained t-shirt. "So," Damon said, sipping his coffee, "what exactly do you do?" She smiled behind her cup. "I run a company." "What kind of company?" "Tech, software." "B2B solutions." Damon blinked. "Wait, like, you're in charge?" She nodded. "I'm the CEO." He nearly choked. "You're kidding." "Nope," she said, amused by his reaction. He leaned back. "So you're like rich," she laughed. "That's one way to put it. Why didn't you say anything before?" "I don't usually lead with that. People treat me differently once they know." He nodded slowly. "Makes sense." She looked at him. "And what about you? You always dive into fights for strangers." "Only when they need it," he said simply. "And Ruby was in the shop. I don't want her thinking it's okay to just walk past someone who needs help." Her expression softened again. "You're a good dad." He glanced at the counter where Ruby sat with a milkshake and a coloring book. "She's everything to me." Dahlia smiled. "I noticed." There was a pause. "So," she said, "what would it take for me to see you again?" He stared at her. "You're serious?" She nodded. "You seem like someone I'd like to know better." He scratched the back of his neck. "I'm not exactly in your world. Maybe I'm tired of my world." He looked at her for a long second. All right, one dinner. That's it. Deal, she said, grinning. That Saturday she picked him up. He expected a fancy restaurant. He didn't expect a chauffeured black SUV with a guy in a suit holding the door open for him. You said dinner, he said as he slid in beside her. You didn't say you'd bring a driver, she shrugged. I like to travel in comfort. They pulled up to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The place shimmered with glass walls, golden lights, and candlelit tables. Damon looked around, overwhelmed. This is not a burger joint, Dahlia grinned. No, but they do have sliders, he laughed despite himself. They sat at a table with a view of the city. Dahlia ordered for both of them lobster risotto for her, steak for him, and wine that cost more than his grocery bill. You're really not fazed by any of this, huh? He asked. She tilted her head. You mean the money? Yeah, I worked hard to get here. But it doesn't define who I am. He stared at her, something shifting in his chest. You know, he said quietly, you're not what I expected, she smiled. What did you expect? Cold, untouchable. The kind of person who wouldn't even see someone like me. Dahlia leaned in, her voice soft. Well, then I guess I'm full of surprises. Damon couldn't look away, and for the first time in a long time he felt something stir, something real, something dangerous, something like falling. The next time Dahlia saw Damon, he was leaning against the hood of a black sedan just outside the school gates, arms crossed, eyes scanning the sidewalk. Ruby came skipping out of the building in a pink hoodie, her backpack bouncing with every step. When she spotted Damon, she waved both arms like she was signaling a plane. Dahlia stayed in her car across the street, watching. She'd told herself it was coincidence, that she just happened to be in that part of town. But the truth was, ever since that rooftop dinner, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him. Not the way he looked at her like he was trying to figure her out. Not the way he listened, really listened, without shifting the conversation back to himself. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her feel that. Seen, she waited until Ruby was safely buckled in the passenger seat before stepping out. Damon glanced up, surprised. Dahlia, didn't mean to startle you, she said, crossing the street. You following me? He asked, only half teasing. She grinned. Not exactly, I had a meeting nearby, thought I'd say hi. Ruby leaned out the window. Hi, Miss Dahlia. Hi, sweetheart, she answered. How was school? We made volcanoes. Mine exploded all over the table. Damon opened the driver's door. That's my cue to buy more paper towels. Dahlia hesitated. Hey, I was going to grab a sandwich. Want to join me? He looked at Ruby, then back at Dahlia. We were heading home. I can drop you off after, she offered. If that's okay. He studied her face, then nodded. All right. They ended up at a small bistro tucked behind a bookstore, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten chalkboard menus. Ruby sat between them, sipping apple juice and peppering Dahlia with questions about her favorite animals and whether she'd ever been on a pirate ship. Not a pirate ship, Dahlia answered, amused, but I did once have dinner on a yacht in Monaco. Ruby's eyes went wide. Did it have cannons? No cannons, she said with a laugh, but it had a piano made of glass. That's not real, Ruby declared. It is, Dahlia said, but I couldn't play it, I've got no musical talent. Damon, who had been quietly eating his sandwich, looked up. That surprises me. Why? She asked. You seem like the kind of person who's good at everything. She tilted her head. Nope, I once threw a tennis racket across a court trying to serve, he chuckled. Okay, I believe that. Ruby tugged on his sleeve. Can we go to the bookstore next door? Damon checked the time. Sure, just a few minutes though. I'll take her, Dahlia said. You finish your lunch, he hesitated. You sure? I promised not to buy her a baby grand. Damon nodded, and Ruby grabbed Dahlia's hand as they headed to the store. He watched them disappear between the shelves, a strange tightness forming in his chest. 15 minutes later, they returned with a small stack of picture books and one thin paperback novel. She made me promise not to peek, Dahlia said, handing him the bag. What is it? He asked Ruby. She beamed. Can't tell, it's for your birthday, he blinked. That's not for another month, I'm getting ready early, she said, proud. Dahlia leaned in. She picked it out herself. He gave her a long look. Thanks, they walked out together. The sky was beginning to turn gold, the kind of light that made everything feel softer. Dahlia opened the passenger door for Ruby, who climbed in and began flipping through one of her new books. Damon leaned on the open door. "You didn't have to do all that. I wanted to." He nodded slowly. "You know, you're kind of messing with my head." She raised an eyebrow. "How so? I don't get people like you. You've got everything, but you're out here hanging with me and my kid like it's normal." "Maybe it is. For you, for us," she said quietly. He didn't say anything for a moment. "I don't want to be a charity case," he said finally. Her eyes flashed. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know." He looked down. "You're the first person who's looked at me lately without pity." "I don't pity you, Damon." He met her gaze. "Then what do you see?" She didn't look away. "Someone who doesn't pretend, who shows up for his daughter, who doesn't care if I have a driver or a penthouse." He swallowed hard. "That's a lot to see." "I notice things," she said. He stepped back from the door and closed it. "We should get going." She nodded, but before he turned away, she reached out and touched his wrist. "Come to the benefit Friday night," she said. He frowned. "What benefit?" "My foundation's fundraiser. It's formal, lot of people. Music, food, I'll send a car." "I don't have a tux," he said. "I'll send one of those too," she said with a small smile. "I want you there." He hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." She stepped back. "I'll see you then." As she climbed into her car, Damon watched her go. Ruby looked up from her book. "Are you going to marry her?" He almost choked. "What? She likes you," Ruby said matter-of-factly. "That's how it starts in movies." He shook his head, starting the car. "It's not like that." But the truth was, he wasn't so sure anymore, because with Dahlia, things didn't feel like a movie, they felt real, and real was scarier. Damon had never worn a tuxedo before. He didn't even know how to fasten the cufflinks until the driver, a man named Victor with the patience of a saint, showed him. The suit had been delivered that morning, sharp and tailored like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Ruby had stared at him before he left, her eyes wide. "You look like a prince," she'd whispered. Now, as he stepped out of the luxury car onto the gravel drive of a sprawling estate just outside the city, Damon felt like an imposter in a world that wasn't his. The house wasn't just big, it was staggering. All glass, stone, and warm lighting spilling from tall windows. Classical music drifted from somewhere inside, and the front lawn was dotted with lanterns and sleek cocktail tables where people in designer gowns and suits murmured over champagne. He'd barely taken 2 steps before an older woman in a silver-wrapped dress approached him. "You must be Damon Langley," she said with a knowing smile. "Dahlia mentioned you might be coming." He nodded slowly. "And you are Elizabeth Crane." "I'm on the foundation's board." Her gaze flicked over him appraisingly. "You clean up well." Before he could respond, the front doors opened and Dahlia stepped out, the crowd blurred. She wore a deep navy gown with a plunging back and delicate straps that shimmered like starlight. Her hair was swept into a low twist, a few strands brushing her collarbone. No jewelry except for a single ring on her right hand and a pair of earrings that caught the light when she moved. Damon didn't breathe. She descended the steps slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would. You look." She paused, visibly searching for the right word. "Dangerously good." He gave a quiet laugh, still trying to wrap his head around this version of her, elegant, poised, and yet looking at him like he belonged by her side. "Come on," she said, slipping her hand into his. "I want to show you something." She led him around the side of the estate toward a garden strung with lights. It was quieter here, away from the crowd, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. "This used to be my grandmother's house," she said. "I bought it after she passed and turned it into the foundation's headquarters." "You grew up here?" he asked, surprised. "Every summer, she taught me how to ride a bike on that lawn." She pointed to a stretch of manicured grass. "And how to read a balance sheet at that window." He glanced at her. "Sounds like she was tough." "She was terrifying," Dahlia said with a laugh. "But she never apologized for being powerful. She made me believe I didn't have to either." Damon's gaze dropped to their joined hands. "Why'd you bring me here?" She met his eyes. "Because I wanted you to see where I come from, and because I wanted you to know this place, this life. It doesn't mean anything if it's not shared with people who see past it." He didn't answer right away. The night hummed around them, soft and quiet. "I don't know how to be in your world," he said finally. "Then don't," she said. "Just be in mine." He exhaled slowly. I'm not used to someone wanting me without needing something from me. She stepped closer. Then let me be the first. Before either of them could speak again, a voice called from across the garden. There you are, said a man in a tuxedo, glass of scotch in hand. Dahlia, the mayor's looking for you. She gave a small sigh. Always someone. She turned to Damon. Will you wait? He nodded. As she walked back toward the house, Damon leaned against a tree and watched the stars through the branches. He stayed there a while, letting the night settle into his bones until a different voice interrupted him. Funny, you're not what I pictured. Damon turned. A tall man with slicked hair and a tailored suit stood a few feet away, holding a glass of something amber. Excuse me, I'm Trevor. I handle legal for the foundation. He took a sip. She doesn't usually bring people to these things. Especially not ones who his eyes flicked to Damon's boots, the only part of the outfit Damon had insisted on keeping. Don't fit the mold. Damon's jaw tightened. You always this friendly, just observant. Trevor stepped closer. You're temporary, she gets bored. Trust me, seen it a dozen times. Damon folded his arms. You done? Trevor smiled thinly. Take care, Langley. Enjoy the fairy tale while it lasts. The man disappeared into the house. Damon stared after him, something cold settling in his chest. Are you all right? He turned. Dahlia had returned, watching him carefully. Who was that guy? Damon asked. She followed his gaze. Trevor, just a lawyer. Why? He seems to think I'm just your next distraction. Her expression hardened. He had no right. Is he wrong? Damon asked, voice low. She stepped closer. You really think I'd bring someone to my family home, introduce him to my board, let him meet my daughter if I thought he was temporary? He blinked. Ruby, I stopped by earlier. I dropped off the book she made for the fundraiser auction. Your neighbor said she was proud of it. His breath caught. You didn't tell me. I wanted to surprise you. She paused. I didn't think I needed to ask permission. He looked away. I know, I just didn't expect you to care. Her voice softened. I care more than you think. He met her eyes. And what happens when this stops being fun for you, when I'm not some novelty? Then I guess you'll have to decide whether you believe in something real. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. You scare me, she said quietly, because I can't control this, and I've spent my whole life in control. He didn't move, couldn't. I'm not asking for forever, she whispered, just for the truth. The silence between them stretched, thick with things unsaid. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing hers, slow, hesitant, but electric. Her fingers curled into his lapel, anchoring herself. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Still scared? He asked. Terrified, she murmured. Good, he said. Me too. The next morning, Damon found a note tucked into Ruby's backpack, the one Dahlia had written on thick stationery, folded once, no embellishments. Her handwriting was neat, confident, and at the bottom, she'd drawn a tiny crescent moon, barely the size of a fingernail. He read it twice before tucking it into the drawer beside Ruby's old lunchboxes. She'd written that she didn't want to rush him, that she knew what they had was fragile, but she wasn't afraid of it if he wasn't. He didn't respond, not right away. Instead, he went back to work, changed the oil on a delivery van, fixed a busted brake light, and tried not to think about the way her voice had shaken when she whispered that she was terrified. That had cracked something open in him, something he'd buried under years of responsibility, of scraping by, of pretending he didn't need more than what he had. That night, Ruby sat on the couch drawing a spaceship with hearts on it while Damon stared at a blank television screen. She glanced up at him. Are you thinking about her? He looked over. Who? You know who? He ran a hand over his jaw. Yeah, I guess I am. She set down her crayon. You're allowed to like someone. He leaned back. It's not that simple, kiddo. Why not? He hesitated. Because when grown-ups like each other, they can get hurt, and I don't want that for either of us. Ruby folded her arms. You always say you want people to be kind and brave, and she's both. He turned to her. You like her, don't you? I think she makes you less grumpy. He laughed, low and real. That obvious, she nodded solemnly. The next day, he showed up at her office. He hadn't told her he was coming. He just walked through the revolving doors of a marble lobby, past a receptionist who raised her eyebrows at his heavy boots and flannel shirt, and took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to glass walls, clean lines, and a view of the skyline that made the city look like a model. Dahlia stood in front of it, her back to him, arms crossed. She turned when she heard his steps. "You found me," she said. He stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. "You left a note, and you didn't answer." "I wasn't sure how," she nodded. "You're here now." He looked around. "This is your world, part of it." He took a breath. "I don't want to be a question mark in your life. You're not. I mean it. I don't want to be someone you have to explain or defend." Dahlia walked over, heels silent on the stone floor. "You think I care what anyone else thinks? I think you've worked too hard to have people doubt you." Her voice dropped. "Then don't be one of them." He stared at her. "Are you sure about this?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This was supposed to be for the board's spring retreat. I was going to skip it." He opened it. "A plane ticket. First class, Cabo. I bought two," she said. "Just in case." He raised his eyebrows. "You're inviting me to Mexico," she grinned. "I'm inviting us to have a week where I'm not a CEO and you're not on call every hour." He ran his thumb over the ticket. "What about Ruby? My assistant's sister is a licensed childcare provider. She lives in our building. Ruby can stay with her or we can bring her." "Whatever feels right." He looked at her for a long moment. "You thought this through?" "I did." He nodded slowly. "Then let's make it 3 tickets." The smile that broke across her face made something settle inside him, something solid. 2 weeks later, they were walking along a quiet beach just after sunrise. Ruby ran ahead, chasing the waves with bare feet and squeals of laughter. Damon reached over and took Dahlia's hand. "Do you think we're crazy?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Maybe. But the best things usually are." He stopped and turned to her. "I've never done this before, not with anyone." "Neither have I." He touched her cheek, brushing a strand of hair back. "I kept thinking I had to choose between being enough for Ruby and being enough for you. And I realized I don't have to be anything but myself." She leaned into him. "Exactly." He kissed her then, slow and sure, with the sun warming their backs and the tide lapping at their feet. Behind them, Ruby shouted something about seashells and treasure, and Damon laughed against her lips. When they returned home, Dahlia invited them both to move in. Not to her penthouse, the one with the ice-cold elevator, and the doorman who never smiled, but to the new brownstone. She'd bought on a quiet street with a backyard big enough for a swing set, and a kitchen where Ruby could learn to bake. Damon hesitated, as always, until Ruby ran through the empty rooms and shouted from the top floor, "This one's mine." He turned to Dahlia. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." So they moved in, slowly, imperfectly, but together. And when Dahlia stood in that backyard one rainy afternoon, watching Damon and Ruby build a crooked birdhouse under the porch awning, she realized something. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was the life she'd never dared to want until a stranger with grease on his hands and a fire in his eyes had stepped between her and a man who thought he could own her, and everything had changed. Damon stood outside the courthouse, holding a manila envelope under one arm as the wind tugged at his jacket. He glanced to his right, where Dahlia was checking her watch, her hair pulled into a low ponytail and her coat belted tightly. Behind them, Ruby sat on the courthouse steps with a sketchbook in her lap, drawing a tall building with birds flying above it. "You sure you want to do this here?" Damon asked quietly. Dahlia nodded. "It's not about the place. It's about the promise." He studied her expression, calm, clear, unwavering. Inside the envelope was a set of papers: guardianship updates, emergency authorizations, and a notarized declaration that if anything ever happened to him, Dahlia would step in without question. It was something he'd never imagined doing for anyone, but she hadn't asked for it. She hadn't needed to. He'd just known. They stepped inside, signed what needed signing, and stepped back out into the brisk afternoon air. "I feel like we should mark this somehow," Dahlia said, glancing toward Ruby. Damon tilted his head. "Like how?" "Something small, something that matters." Ruby looked up from her drawing. "Can we get cake?" Dahlia smiled. "That's exactly what I was thinking." An hour later, they were seated at a bakery tucked between a florist and a record store. Ruby's face was dusted with powdered sugar as she devoured a lemon cupcake, and Damon sat across from Dahlia with a coffee in hand, watching her as she scraped chocolate frosting off a fork. "I never asked," she said. "Why did you agree to all this, not just the papers?" Everything, he leaned back, eyes steady, because I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop and started believing I could just be happy. She set her fork down. You were always allowed to be. I didn't know that until you. They sat in silence for a few beats as the bakery filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of cups. Do you want to go away with me? Dahlia asked suddenly. He blinked. Now, not forever, just for a few days. No phones, no meetings, just us, he hesitated. What about Ruby? She's been asking to stay with my cousin's kids. We can arrange it. She'll be safe, happy, spoiled. He looked at Ruby, who was now drawing a 3-tiered cake with bright pink icing. All right, he said. Where to? She smiled. I was thinking somewhere green. Maybe the mountains. 3 days later, they were in a glass cabin perched on the edge of a ridge overlooking a pine valley. The air was cool and sharp, and the fireplace crackled while they lay on a wool blanket, Damon's hand resting on Dahlia's hip, her head on his chest. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full. I used to think I had to earn love, Dahlia said, her voice quiet, with achievements, power. Control, he brushed his thumb along her waist. You don't. I know that now. He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then the corner of her mouth. I've never felt more like myself than I do with you. She tilted her face toward him. And I've never wanted anything more than to be exactly where I am. The next morning, they woke tangled under the same blanket, the sun pouring through the windows. They didn't rush. They didn't plan. They just existed, slow breakfasts, long walks, soft words. When they returned to the city, something had shifted, not in the loud way, not in the dramatic way either, but in the way that made everything feel settled. Weeks passed. One Saturday, Dahlia brought Damon to an old warehouse she'd purchased years ago but never touched. It was dusty, wide open, and filled with beams of light cutting through the tall windows. What is this? He asked, glancing around. A blank canvas, she said. I want to build something here, not for business, for us. He looked at her, confused. A garage, she said. With space for you to expand, take on more clients, set your own hours. He shook his head slowly. That's too much. It's not a gift, it's a partnership. He stared at her, heart thudding. You're serious. I want to build a life with you, Damon. One that makes sense for both of us. He took a step toward her. You're the only person who's ever said that and meant it. I don't say anything I don't mean. He pulled her close, his hands framing her face. Then marry me, she blinked. What? I don't have a ring, I don't have a plan. But I know I want this. I want you, I want us. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Yes, she whispered. Yes. They didn't wait. 1 month later, they stood in the garden behind their new brownstone. Dahlia wore a simple ivory dress with a silk ribbon at her waist. Damon wore a linen suit Ruby had picked out. Everything was green and blooming, and the only music was the wind in the trees and the sound of their daughter giggling as she scattered white petals across the grass. I used to think love was something you had to chase, Dahlia said during her vows. But you showed me it's something you can build, steady, real, unshakable. Damon's voice was rough when he answered. You didn't change my life. You showed me the life I'd forgotten I deserved. They kissed under a canopy of branches, with Ruby cheering and clapping louder than everyone else. They danced in the backyard until the string lights glowed above them and the cake had been reduced to crumbs. Later that night, when the guests had gone and Ruby was asleep upstairs, Damon pulled Dahlia into their kitchen and poured 2 glasses of wine. To everything we never saw coming, he said, raising his glass. She clinked hers against his. And to finally arriving. They stood there, barefoot on the tile, holding each other in a house that had once been just walls and now felt like home. And outside, the city kept moving, unaware that on one quiet street, love had found its place and decided to stay.